everyone, my name is Josh and welcome to WHIMs. And today I'm going to be talking to you about the David Lynch masterpiece Blue Velvet. And this film came out in 1986 and it stars Carl McLachlan, Laura Dern, Isabella Rossellini and Dennis Hopper. And this film follows the story of Jeffrey Beaumont, played by McLachlan, who is returning home to his hometown of Lumberton, USA, after his father has a heart attack. So he's basically coming back to look after the house, do the chores, do all the things that his father can't do, having been bedridden, and looking after his elderly mother and his grandmother. While he's going through the grieving process of having to adjust to life, having to do stuff on his own after his father's gone to hospital, he finds in a deserted field a severed ear, and when he goes to investigate it, he finds that the ear was, in fact, clipped off of a man with a pair of scissors. And it has this really wonderful flash edit where when the pathologist says that the ear was clipped off with a pair of scissors, you see a pair of scissors clip off a piece of the crime scene tape, which I thought was a brilliant edit. But this pretty much leads to Jeffrey Beaumont letting out his inner detective sleuth to try to figure out where the severed ear came from, who it belonged to, and what the big mystery of this whole entire thing is. Because you just don't lose ears that way, so there has to be something much more deeper in this story. And what I really like about this film is it is a film about the dual side of human nature. There is a dark side to every good place. There is a good side to every dark place. It's never just one thing or the other. There's always a mixture of the two. For every light-hearted and very lovely looking place, there's always a dark, seedy underbelly. For every, quaint riverbed that happens to be there, there's always something rotting or decaying, whether it's a dead body or just, a reef or, seaweed or whatever it happens to be. There's always something dark and sinister in the world of David Lynch. He always plays around with that duality very well. He went on to really further flesh that out in his television series Twin Peaks, but I think this is where it started. And this is one of those films where I feel like it's the most accessible of David Lynch's work. Yes, you could definitely make the argument that a lot of David Lynch's films are accessible if you add on to the fact that you have to watch those films multiple times in order to get everything, like Eraserhead, Mulholland Drive, Lost Highway, Inland Empire, Wild at Heart, or even his other films like The Elephant Man or Dune. You really do get this impression that this film is where you should start, because there is still a linear narrative to everything. Yes, there's surreal and abstract imagery every once in a while, but it never detracts from the story that you're seeing. And what Jeffrey finds out throughout his investigative processes is he meets a nightclub singer by the name of Dorothy Valance, played by Isabella Rossellini. And through his investigation with himself and a girl from town called Sandy Williams, played by Laura Dern, they're trying to investigate this woman and see if she has a hand in any of the crimes taking place. But then they realise, or he realises at least, Jeffrey realises, that there's something much more darker to Isabella Rossellini, Dorothy Valance's life in this film than what initially meets the eye. It turns out that she is being kept against her will by a man called Frank Booth, who's played by the wonderful, the late great, but also very terrifying in this film, Dennis Hopper. And he plays Frank Booth as a very psychotic, very depraved, very dark, and very sinister individual who can be quite happy, but then he can also be quite terrifying. He can go from being your best friend one minute to absolutely wanting to kill you the next. It's one of those very terrifying switcheroos that he does. And there's a little bit more to this character than meets the eye, though. And that's one of the things that I will definitely say about this film, is it does have, although on the surface it may seem like a very standard good versus evil story, when you actually get deeper into it, and when you actually watch the film multiple times, you realise that there's actually a much more interesting story taking place as the film is going along. because what happens with Jeffrey throughout the course of this story is he goes through a lot of interesting changes. At first, he starts off as a very stereotypical kind of, good guy kind of character. Like, if you can imagine a character archetype, he's kind of like almost like the live action equivalent of a Mickey Mouse, where he's too good. He's got this kind of like, oh, gee whiz, oh, good golly kind of attitude, where he does, you'd imagine that if he spilt something or if he broke something on the floor, he'd go, oh, good golly, gee whiz, why did that have to happen, kind of thing. Like, you can get the impression that he doesn't want to swear or he doesn't want to have any dark side, but he still is fun and very jovial. But there is a darkness to Jeffrey, and that really does kind of come to light through his investigation of the events involving Dorothy Valance. And what's happening with her is she's basically being held against her will by Frank Booth, and she's being held against her will to perform these very awful acts of sex, prostitution, and various other things for Frank in exchange for the safe return of her child and her husband. And that adds another layer of darkness to the events of the story, and it adds more urgency to everything as well, because there is that element of innocence being tainted through the acts of what's going on in this story, because of course Jeffrey's innocence is tainted, but then again Jeffrey's innocence was tainted years ago as soon as he came of age and he discovered that sex was a thing. But that's one of the things that I really do like, is they do play around with the idea of when innocence is lost, what happens afterwards. And you could go either one of two ways. You could go the way of Jeffrey Beaumont, who's actually trying to uncover the mystery and trying to figure out what's going on and try to stop it. Or you could end up like Frank Booth, where he's so overwhelmed with the emotions that he's got, to the point where he just doesn't know how to express them. And the only way he could express them is through violence or through aggression. And a lot of the behind-the-scenes sources that I'm going to reference for this particular video were taken from the Blue Velvet documentary, The Mysteries of Love, which was on YouTube at one point or another, but I have a feeling that at the time of this recording it's probably been removed, because YouTube has a tendency of doing that, where it does tend to take off things. And I'll also be referencing the extended edition, which was featured on YouTube but doesn't exist anymore. So if I do reference some behind the scenes stuff, that's one of the sources that I will be looking at for this particular review for reference. So let's talk about Frank Booth. Frank Booth is one of those characters who, when you first meet him, he does sound like a very stereotypical, angry, aggressive, violent mob boss villain. But when you actually really think about his relationship with people and how he interacts with others throughout the course of the story, there is something there that has more layers to it. Like, say, for example, there is a scene where he gets Jeffrey and he takes him on a joyride, and one of the places that he stops off at is a place called Ben's. And Ben is effectively this guy who he comes to visit for drug info and various other things. But he has quite a very strong relationship with Ben, to the degree where it could almost be said that there's almost a romantic entanglement or a purely sexual entanglement with these two men, because of the way he behaves with them, especially when it comes to the way Frank interacts with all these people, the way he sort of, behaves in regards to how he presents himself in front of Ben. He's very sophisticated, but then he's also got this very seething layer of, anger. And when one of his friends goes, "Oh, I've got the beer, Frank, what do you want me to do with it? Do you want me to pour it?" And he goes, "No, I want you to fuck it. Yes, pour the fucking beer." And I really love that, where he just sort of jumps from being, very happy with Ben to kind of shouting at one of his men. And I really love that. It's really terrifying, but it's really funny as well. And I think Des Hopper really adds something to that. But there's this really wonderful, the thing that really adds to the almost sexual tension between him and Frank is there's a scene where Ben is singing the song In Dreams by Roy Orbison. It's one of my favourite Roy Orbison songs. And one of the reasons why it's one of my favourites is because of this scene. He's basically holding a lamp under his face and he switches it on, so it's like a microphone. And he's also doing it sort of as a stage light. But then there's also this thing where he goes, he's starting to mouth the words of In Dreams, like a candy-coloured clown they call the Sandman, tiptoes to my room every night, just sprinkle stardust and to whisper, go to sleep, everything is all right. And then he starts doing the motions, like he goes, I close my eyes and I drift away. And when you cut to Frank, he's singing along with it, but he's looking at Ben as if he really, really is just seduced by him. He absolutely just loves the way he looks. He loves the pale, almost, mime look to him. He almost has black lipstick on as well, so there's also that element of there being sort of like a very demonic look to him, or kind of like an old cel-shaded cartoon or an old, rubber hose cartoon, where it's very black and white, and it's very kind of almost ghostly looking, ghostly in appearance. It's actually a very chilling image that they created for Ben. But I really do love the fact that Frank Booth is sort of looking at him, and he's very seduced by him. Like, he's just sort of looking, and he's sort of hypnotized by him, and he's singing along to, or sort of mouthing the words along to it, like he's singing a silent prayer like dreamers do. But then he starts getting angry when he gets it wrong, and it's like, why is he getting angry? Like, he doesn't need to get angry. Like, he's clearly enjoying the song. But then you realise that he's getting angry because he doesn't know if this is the right thing to feel. Like, no one told him. So part of me just feels like there's something very LGBTQ about Frank and Ben in this film as well. So there's a lot of LGBTQ themes, even though technically it's not really an LGBTQ film. It has a lot of themes to do with the LGBTQ community. And I love that about this film, and I really do think it adds a lot more layers to a character who could be very one note. But yeah, there's a lot of great moments in this. There's a wonderful moment where I've lost my train of thought now. There's this really wonderful moment where when Jeffrey has been attacked by Frank, he gets taken out into this abandoned field, sort of like this junkyard place, and they play In Dreams again, and Frank gives him or gets lipstick on his face, and he starts saying the words pretty, pretty, and he starts kissing Jeffrey all over the face. And it got a lot worse in the initial draft of the script. In the original script, it was intended that Jeffrey was going to be violated by Frank in one draft of the script, but that was removed to keep it more ambiguous as to what Frank's intents were. But that adds to the layer of there's something quite repressed about Frank as well. There's almost like this almost openly, or he's almost like a repressed gay man almost, or bisexual man in many ways, because he does feel somewhat repressed. He does feel somewhat an attraction to both Jeffrey and Ben at the same time. So there's a lot of great ideas that you could play with there, and that was obviously referenced in one draft of the script. But there was also something that David Lynch said in the behind-the-scenes documentary, where he just simply said there's just something about Frank that's very almost, he's madly in love, but he just doesn't know how to express it. And that's effectively what's going on here. That's what's happening when he's having that scene where he's listening to In Dreams, he's watching Ben perform, he's in love with Frank, he's in love with Ben, but he's almost angry at himself for feeling love. He's almost angry at himself for feeling this affection, because he only sees love as it needs to be given with a punch to the face as well. Like, you need to punch that person in the face as well in order to show that you care almost. And it's really kind of almost sad. And there's this other great scene. There's so many good scenes in this film where Jeffrey is in the car, and he's just being taken out to this car. But before he gets given the kissing scene with Frank Booth with the lipstick, he has a moment where he just says, "You're like me." And he starts doing something very inappropriate with Dorothy Valance, and Jeffrey punches him in the face. But that scene comes back to haunt him when he wakes up in the morning, and he's just sort of waking up, and he remembers what was said by Frank, and he says, "Oh, you're like me." And Jeffrey has this moment where he genuinely cries, he feels very defeated, he feels very deflated. He feels like there's a part of him where he feels this is true. And he flashbacks to all these other scenes as well, including a scene where he's forced by Dorothy to hit her. And he complies at one point, and it really does make him feel kind of dark and very kind of filthy afterwards that he's done this to another woman. But it feels very well thought out, and I feel like David Lynch does have a lot of moments where he can think about this stuff. But I really do love this film, Blue Velvet. It's one of my favourites of David Lynch's filmography. I do think that there are other good films that he's referenced, and I do think people should watch this film, because even though it may be upsetting at points, it is a very good film. It's a very harrowing ride. And let me know if you've seen this film. Let me know what you think after you've watched the film 3 or 4 times over. Like if you've seen it for the fourth time, the fifth time, or even the second time or the third time, let me know what you thought after repeat viewings. Like, what did you get out of this film? What did you get out of the overall presentation? Because I really do want to hear other people's thoughts about this film and what they thought of it when they first saw it, or what they thought of it after that initial viewing. What sort of emotions did it leave you with? Because it is one of those films where it does take you on an emotional roller coaster, and I do feel that that's one of the things that I really do love about this film, is that it does give you that sort of thrill ride, and that's what happens with a lot of David Lynch's films. So let me know what you guys think in the comments, what you thought of this film. This has been my review for Blue Velvet, and I hope you're all having a very good day. This has been Josh with Whims, and take care. Bye bye for now.